Resident Evil is a prime example of an early gaming titan that has gone through multiple iterations, and yet somehow has always remained relevant, from its early peaks with the first two PS1 games to its middling valleys of the 7th generation entries. And as a fan of the franchise who first came into contact with the series through Resident Evil 5, I can proudly say that I have beaten every mainline title. Not that one. I've beaten every mainline numbered title. 1 through 8. The point is, I have played Resident Evil 1 through 8 in some form or another, and I am only better for it. However, I have only accomplished this through a way of gaming that is often looked down on as a bitter vacuum of creative expression that silos game development into greedy cash grab tactics in order to produce the most valuable, market-accessible, revenue-generating, artistically devoid, and manipulative forms of game design. I am, of course, talking about the remake. Now, I might have been using hyperbole in that description, but in all honesty, I understand why remakes are so heavily criticized. They are essentially just a repackaged game you've already played, usually being sold at full price and occasionally little more than a slight visual upgrade. But in the modern era, remakes can be so much more. In fact, I would even argue they can be just as revolutionary and innovative as their original titles were. Hell, I might even say that more often than not, there's a good chance that they even provide a valid substitute to the original as the best way to play a game. Or maybe even have the opportunity to be better than it used to be. With this video, I aim to explore just that in the inaugural episode of The Penny Journey. I want more remakes. Call me a corporate bootlicker all you want, but I love a good remake. Hell, my top 10 games of 2023 and 2024 has not one, but 2 remakes on them. Dead Space, Demon's Souls, Persona 3 Reload, Link's Awakening, Super Mario RPG, the list goes on and on of great games that had debatably even greater moments the second time around. Whether it's from the technical performances of these titles, more refined experiences from the original, or a whole new experience crafted with modern audiences in mind. The remake is a great tool for gamers to discover and fall in love with classic titles lost to time, or for long-term fans to rediscover their passion for games that they haven't revisited in years. The Dead Space remake is an excellent personal example of this. I was a huge fan of the 2008 original back in the day. It was one of the few true examples of survival horror in the 7th generation. Resident Evil had gone full-blown action, abandoning the genre. And arguably, Dead Space was the only AAA series keeping its presence known at the time. But that didn't last very long, as the next 2 titles would take a more action-y turn, the third one appealing to so many gaming trends of the time that the franchise would lose its identity entirely and sour most fans, effectively killing the franchise. But in 2023, Dead Space returned in the form of a remake, developed by Motive Studios. The goal was simple: recreate the horror classic and make some small changes to the narrative and gameplay to improve the quality of life, and have the original story fit into the overall series narrative a bit more naturally. The second and third game introduced a fanatic religious cult that was absent in the first. This cult was added in the remake. Alongside that, some tedious and frustrating minigames had been heavily altered into making them fit more into the base gameplay loop, and the USG Ishimura, the game's setting, was fully connected so that players wouldn't be interrupted by loading screens. However, the most important aspect of this remake is something that is so understated that most gamers probably wouldn't even notice it: the Intensity Director. This is a system where, behind the scenes, an artificial director could play one of over 1,200 unique events whenever you enter a room. This could range from the lights flickering and hearing noises in the walls to full-on new enemies popping out of vents and appearing where they wouldn't before. This is important because arguably the most vital part of any horror video game is its atmosphere. However, a common problem faced in the genre is that whenever the player backtracks through an area they've already cleared out, it can feel more like speedrunning through an empty haunted house instead of cautiously navigating the infested halls of a space station run amok with necromorphs. The Intensity Director fixes this problem entirely, restoring the game's tension in its slower parts and allowing moments such as backtracking, exploring, and scavenging to actually feel like you could still be in danger at any point in the game. There are many examples of games in the survival horror genre of this being a real problem. You know that real annoying part of The Last of Us where you clear out an enemy arena and the characters all take the same exasperated sigh, stand up and say,
I was too damn close.
And then you spend just as much time as it took to clear out the arena, combing back over it, pressed up against the walls like a mime doing its trapped in the box routine, mashing triangles so you can pick up nondescript pieces of cloth and screws so that you can do it all over again. Yeah, the Intensity Director makes that a bit more fun. Unfortunately, I can only hope this system is adopted into other games and franchises because EA decided that over 2 million sales from one of their lesser-known studios in one of the most competitive years of all time wasn't enough, and instead is turning Motive into a Battlefield support studio because that's clearly the game franchise that is on a hot streak and requires more support in 2025. To return to my example of Resident Evil, without the remakes of RE 1 through 3, there would be little to no option for me to experience the thrills and horrors of the Spencer Mansion, the RCPD, or the apocalyptic streets of Raccoon City. That is, without having to spend hundreds of dollars tracking down old hardware, finding copies of what are probably damaged discs or spotty emulations that would be more work than I'm willing to commit to play these dated horror classics. But all of that changed in 2019 when Capcom released the Resident Evil 2 remake. It's worth noting at the time I'd only played 5, 6, and 7, which 2 of those aren't necessarily considered the crown jewels of the series. I hadn't really considered myself a fan yet. More of someone who enjoyed an occasional Resident Evil game, but RE2 instantly enraptured me in its world and was a truly exhilarating and horrifying experience. I remember the first night playing it, making it all the way to the introduction of the liquor, and being so scared that I couldn't even bring myself to fight it. I squeaked past the door to the pitch black hall, rain and wind pouring in from a broken window, lightning illuminating a tapestry of blood and bodies decorating the hall. Suddenly, just as quick as the lightning struck, a horrific tongue lashes out from above and entraps a body laying below, snatching it to the monster lurking in the shadows. The liquor had made its debut. Fear envelops me. Instead of blasting or sneaking past the foe, I duck into the STARS office to hide and collect myself. I remember collecting items in a panic, desperately trying to arm myself for the inevitable. When I finally mustered up the courage to face the iconic monster and come out of the office, it wasn't there. Gone, nowhere to be seen. My eyes immediately locked onto a bloody vent in the ceiling. I pulled out my shotgun and zeroed in on the vent, convinced that the liquor would eventually leap from its shadows and attack. Tension built in me indefinitely. Eyes locked to the hellish hole. As I made it to the corner of the hall, I discovered my cautious assumption had revealed itself to be a terrifying red herring. The beast was not inside the vent. Rather, attached to the wall just out of sight, landing me face to face with the deliciously terrible monster. Because of this subversion of expectation, I was pissing myself all over again. I was terrified, and it was the closest I had come to sleeping with the lights on after playing a video game. I mean, come on, they even made the blood look like it had just dragged one of its victims into that vent I was so certain it had fled to. The reason I tell this story is because after my first play session, I went online to see the liquor's introduction in the original game. Yeah, not exactly the same effect in comparison. Don't get me wrong, I still think the original games hold their fair share of scares. This was proven to me when I played the Resident Evil 1 remake later on down the line. It's just that its horror comes from its atmosphere and surprise from cuts between fixed camera angles, rather than its grotesque monsters and blood. But in its remade form, Resident Evil 2 allowed me, as someone with a casual interest in the games, to become a full-blown fan, instantly wanting to explore every nook and cranny of the terrifying Raccoon City Police Department. And when I had seen all that RE2 had to give, I was hungry for more. I then went on a campaign to play every mainline title I could and experience them in whatever form they came. First person, fixed camera, or over the shoulder. I was in love with Resident Evil, and to this day, I still thirst for more. This would not have been possible without the remake. But remakes can be more than just reintroductions of old franchises to new fans, though that is a phenomenal purpose for them. They can also be used to reignite the passion for a game and reinvigorate what was once a gripping title that has sort of lost its luster over time. The Last of Us Part 1's rebuilt environments, textures, character models, and ambiance created an atmosphere as thick and effective as it was when I first played the game just 9 years before. As I said in my review, it almost felt like I was playing the game for the first time again. But that's not all this game did. The developer Naughty Dog took it another step forward and allowed access of play for an entirely new and different audience who may not have been able to play the game before: the disabled community. You see, The Last of Us Part 2 was the last game from Naughty Dog before the remake of this first game. And in Part 2, they developed a lot of accessibility tools to assist disabled gamers who may have struggled or not been able to play the game at all. People with disabilities such as hand pains, blindness, and deafness, etc., all had workarounds in the game settings that helps or allows them to play Part 2 in its entirety. This was a revolutionary moment in gaming and put a huge spotlight on accessibility that hadn't been seen before. However, Part 1 was missing these features, and they can't simply be patched into the game if it wasn't built for it on a foundational level. So with this remake, the devs had an incredible opportunity to bring over those options so that disabled players can enjoy both parts of the duology. This truly shows that The Last of Us Part 1 is much more than a simple fidelity upgrade that looks better. It is in fact detrimental to gamers who may have always wanted to see Joel and Ellie's story, but may not have been able to themselves without someone playing with or for them. However, this game also highlights how egregious a remake can be. It plays the same as the original for the most part, and the narrative is wholly unchanged, and inarguably, it's still easily accessible and playable today, having a PS4 remaster, and still visually looking like a modern video game. Where Dead Space, for example, launched on the same console and looks a little more like a mobile game than a full-on AAA console experience. However, I would argue that the visual fidelity of both games are, at the very least, starting to show their age, and I doubt a new player experiencing them for the first time would have the prime experience. So are these remakes unnecessary cash grabs? Maybe. There is certainly an argument for it. But I think it's worth having cash grabs like these so that new players can discover gaming classics in their best form, and fans have an excuse to revisit their favorites with the newest, shiniest coat of paint. Alongside games such as Persona 3 Reload, Super Mario RPG, Mario and the Thousand Year Door, Link's Awakening, Demon's Souls, Shadow of Colossus, and possibly what we are going to get out of my personal favorite game of all time, the Metal Gear Solid 3 Remake, Delta Snake Eater. However, speaking of Metal Gear remakes, so of course, not all remakes are made equally, and for a long time, it was far from a guarantee on whether or not it would be quality at all. Looking back at the 6th generation of consoles, two prime examples come to mind: the HD remake of Resident Evil 1, which is classic, and the infamous Metal Gear Solid remake subtitled The Twin Snakes. Now, the internet has documented the problems with Twin Snakes in great detail, and I'd like to keep this video focused on player relationships with remakes as a whole, so I'll keep this brief. The goal with the Twin Snakes was simple: remake the first Metal Gear Solid game with the gameplay and visuals of the second. Which, on paper, sounds great. The original game was early in the era of transferring from 2D to 3D, which is an era that has not aged well at all. Its gameplay is stiff and occasionally unforgiving, and compared to its sequel, it's missing some key quality of life features such as first-person aiming and opening doors without equipping keycards. However, in execution, Twin Snakes leaves a lot to be desired. The level, boss, and enemy encounter designs were unchanged, allowing the updated gameplay mechanics to completely break many elements of the game. Players are able to skip entire challenge rooms, easily manipulate enemy AI, and circumvent boss designs, leaving them more useless than a GameCube carrying handle. On top of that, the presentation in cutscenes is a little too Michael Bay, Snake is a little too Neo, and the voice cast overall doesn't feel as interested in re-recording the dialogue.
The nuclear weapons disposal facility on Shadow Moses Island in Alaska's Fox Archipelago was attacked and captured by next-generation special forces, being led by members of Foxhound.
The nuclear weapons disposal facility on Shadow Moses Island in Alaska's Fox Archipelago was attacked and captured by next-generation special forces, being led by members of Foxhound.
All of these things leave a finished product that overall feels derivative of the original game, and probably the prime example of how remakes can go awry super easily if not given enough TLC. Let's get real, ladies and gentlemen. Let's cut the crap. I've been having a lot of fun recapping and recounting and recalling and recording and re-explaining and retelling and re-examining and reiterating and refurbishing. Stop. While I've been examining the history of remakes and the good and bad parts about them, I've been avoiding one example in particular. And that's because this particular example is doing something never seen before. Something that is so ambitious and bold, innovative and meta, that I only wish I had time to break down in detail what is happening, because it will likely never happen again. Because, what if a remake was more than a remake? What if you remade a game and created a sequel to it at the same time? When fans of Final Fantasy VII first heard of the remake, they must have been ecstatic, and then quickly confused and concerned. Because a few months after its announcement at E3 2015, they announced that the game was going to be released in multiple parts. Now, you have to understand, at the time, we were in peak Telltale era, who were super well known for releasing their games in multiple parts, and we were getting multiple games that were releasing in multiple parts. Sometimes it would work, and sometimes it would fail dramatically, and sometimes it just felt unnecessary. And this felt like one of those times. The idea of splitting Final Fantasy VII into multiple parts raised a lot of questions. How many parts will there be? Where does each part end? Will combat be the same throughout each part? Will choices made in-game matter part to part? Will we be able to go to areas that were once available in previous parts? And most importantly, why even do this in the first place? Well, the answer to that is complicated, and unfortunately requires spoilers to the original game and to these remake games. So if you care about spoilers and you haven't played the OG or the 2 remake parts released up until now, yes, there are spoilers for those as well. I recommend clicking off. So Sephiroth is a time traveler from the future, and he knows he loses in the original game. But you wouldn't know that from any of the marketing or even the opening hours of the game, and experienced players probably didn't start catching on until probably about this moment.
Cloud!
What's wrong?
Come with me! Quickly! We were getting ready to set out when those things showed up and came after us.
The others?
Barrett and Jesse are holding their ground, but for how long? I don't know.
How's your ammo?
Running low! Shit! Jesse!
Damn it!
Huh?
The hell?
Jesse,
You okay? Me and my 2 left feet. Easy now.
So this immediately gives the remake trilogy, they eventually confirmed it would be a trilogy, 2 separate purposes. First, create an expanded yet faithful recreation of the original game, flushing out storylines and quests that were either only implied or fully cut from the original game, satisfying fans and giving new players an enjoyable, accessible experience that they couldn't really get from the original today. And second, leave enough breadcrumbs and meta commentary throughout the game to hint at an overarching narrative that involves all versions of Final Fantasy VII, including its spin-offs and sequels. This is so returning fans can have something new and exciting to latch onto, so they can stay engaged throughout the entire journey of the trilogy. This is genius. Not only does this allow a new generation of gamers to hop into a classic beloved game, but it also resets the stakes for returning fans and gives them hope, or maybe dread, on what is going to happen to Cloud and the party by the end of this adventure. What's going to change? What's staying the same? What's going to be brand new? My first experience with Final Fantasy VII was the remake. And for nearly the entire time, I was falling in love with the characters, story, and world until I got to the end of the game and was shocked and confused at what I was experiencing. It wasn't until my best friend and co-host of the TwoPennyGames cast, Connor Elliott, say hi, Connor. Hi. Broke it down and explained what they were doing.
careful now. That which lies ahead does not yet exist. Our world will become a part of it one day, but I will not end. Nor will I have you end.
This is...
The edge of creation. Cloud, lend me your strength. Let us defy destiny together.
Never.
Not yet. "7 seconds till the end. Time enough for you, perhaps. But what will you do with it? Let's see."
My mind was blown. It was clear to me, as someone wanting to know the whole story of these characters that I had grown to love, that simply waiting for the next part wasn't going to be enough. I had to go back and experience the original game in its entirety if I was to get the full experience of what the remake was going to offer. And lo and behold, I discovered that the original game is a beloved classic for a reason. It instantly became one of my favorites, and it is arguably still the best RPG ever made. Side note, if you're interested in playing the original, there are some small quality of life improvements in the modern ports of the game, allowing you to speed up the game and get through battles easier. Really recommend taking advantage of these cheats on your first time through. This allowed me to be right alongside all other fans in the climactic moments of Part 2, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which was a roller coaster of emotions and tension. I don't know if there's another game that had me screaming in joy and then agony so quickly. And while Part 3 is still on the horizon and many questions are left unanswered, this remake trilogy has checked off every box you could have with a remake. Modern controls, innovative action RPG combat, a revamped and expanded story delivering the ultimate level of fan service without sacrificing quality in storytelling, beautiful visuals and music, and most importantly, the ability to turn new players into die-hard fans. It's unknown how Final Fantasy VII Remake will end, but I've never been happier with being converted into a fandom as much as I am with this. There are many more examples of remakes, some good, some bad, and while they don't always necessarily pan out or stay true to the vision of the original game, there are many examples of how a remake can reinvigorate old fans, convert new ones, or simply allow space for a whole new group of players. Yes, they aren't original titles, and yes, we don't necessarily need remakes for every game that's ever come out. But I'm more often than not willing to allow space for these remakes rather than just let the IP sit dormant until the end of time. So I want more. Give me an Infamous remake, a Mario 64 remake, or better yet, give me a Sly Cooper trilogy remake in the style of what we saw with Crash and Spyro. Imagine a Sly 1 with the same structure and gameplay of 2 and 3. Or even a Knights of the Old Republic remake, not that one, that has updated battle systems and visuals so as to not turn away new players. More likely than not, if they fall in love with it, they will likely go revisit the original anyways. That would be so much more interesting, in my opinion, than an old, close-minded fan drawing a line in the sand and saying new players should be forced to play the older, outdated version without any way to find an accessible way into being a fan. I never would have played the original Final Fantasy VII without the remake. Dead Space would have been a distant, fond memory of a game I played long ago. Resident Evil would have probably lost one of their most die-hard fans if not for the remake. That's the thing about remakes that's often misconstrued, I think. The remake doesn't erase the original game, but rather open the door for more people to look back, do their homework, know their history, and actually uplift what came before. And while, yes, we all would love new games to excite us and become classics in their own right, I would argue that with the state and scale of the industry, there is plenty of room for both.